Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining PHCA for today's webinar, PHCA, Politics and the Pandemic. Advocating for long-term care in 2021. I hope everyone is doing well and staying healthy during this ongoing challenge with COVID-19. We recognize the extraordinary work that you've been doing through the crisis, and thank you for all that you're doing. I'm Wendy Johnson with the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. PHCA offers monthly webinars to members to receive updates from department staff on regulations, learn from industry experts on current trends and practices, and to gain a better understanding of practical application tools to equip you so that you may continue to provide the highest level of quality care possible. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the PHCA website. The webinar has been approved for 1 continuing education credit for PHCA members. Credits will be uploaded to NAB within the next 2 weeks for those who have provided us with your unique NAB number, and I will be sending attendance certificates. A survey will be launched at the close of the webinar. Your feedback is important to us and our speakers, so please take a moment to complete the survey. All attendees will be in listen-only mode. However, throughout the presentation, please feel free to submit your questions using your questions pane on the right hand of your screen, and our presenters will address them at the end of the presentation. Today's webinar is being presented by our very own Zach Shamberg, President and CEO, and Tim Ward, our new Director of Advocacy and Government Relations here at PHCA, along with special guest, House Aging Committee Chairman, Gary Day. I'll now turn the webinar over to Zach.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you everyone for joining us for what many have told me is the most highly anticipated webinar in 2021, maybe even of the last 5 to 10 years. So we'll see if we can live up to that name, but it's not anticipated because I'm here. You hear from me a lot. I think what most people are looking forward to are the 2 guests that I have to my left and my right. First, I want to introduce Tim Ward, who is our new Director of Government Relations here at PHCA. Tim has been here for a little over a month and already is making his mark, not just for this association, but for those we represent. So Tim, thank you for joining us today. I also want to welcome our very, very special guest, and I'm very proud to welcome him here today, State Representative, and more importantly for our industry and for our association, the Chairman of the House Aging Committee. He represents Berks and Lehigh counties, State Representative Gary Day. Mr. Chairman, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here, and I look forward to the interaction today.
So I do want to get to the chairman, and we're going to ask him a few questions about why advocacy is so important to him and his colleagues. But before we begin today's webinar, I would be remiss if I didn't pause and acknowledge that today is March 11th, and we chose this date for a reason. Today marks 1 year since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. And as we've told you many times throughout the past 12 months, in that time, the men and women who are joining us on this webinar, as well as your colleagues who weren't able to make it today, as well as your frontline staff, you have truly been at the epicenter of the adversity, of the hardship, and with everything that has been brought on as a result of this pandemic. But I think even more important, we have seen you persevere through it all, and we are very, very proud to advocate on your behalf. And I want to thank you for everything that you've done these past 12 months. And I'm sure Tim and the chairman would echo those thanks as well. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to get right to you and talk about your role, not just in the House of Representatives, but as chairman of the Aging Committee. You know, we're here to talk about the importance of advocacy and why advocacy should be utilized by our membership. Now, there are hundreds of advocacy organizations in Pennsylvania, and they're all seeking to influence you and your colleagues to achieve policy goals. So in your experience, what tools, what strategies do you find most impactful, especially in the age where we're utilizing social media, there's email, and there's direct or virtual one-on-one meetings?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I really appreciate your introduction and, of course, the time that you've spent with me over the last year, because it's just a little over a year that I've had this responsibility as chairman of the Aging Committee, and really appreciate, your advocacy for your members. And, that's a great question. And I talk to people all the time about the importance. The first thing you have to decide is, do you want to engage? Sometimes, and I think, maybe during the beginning, the first month of this outbreak, nobody had any time to engage in policy discussions. You guys were busy, your members were busy serving residents and people and the employees and trying to figure their way through this. But overall, I think people should say, yes, I want to engage, because we are generalists. Each one of us are elected by our area. And I tell people in every letter, even the ones that come that ask me to do things that I don't think we should be doing, I say, thank you for contacting me. You make me a better state representative by telling me your perspective. So I put that into every letter just as a rank and file member representing the people in my district. And I really believe that. We're generalists. We are not doing what you and your members are doing on a daily basis. So we don't understand the depths and the importance of the different issues. We can understand the general side of it, but it's really important to engage. So that's the first thing. Once you decide you want to engage, there's a laundry list, and I'm sure Tim's going to have probably 12 or 15 different things to do, right? Outreach in your own area, opinion pieces to your local newspapers about issues that are important, and all those things. But what I wanted to do today was boil down, what's the best bang for the buck interacting with, whether it's the chairman of a committee. The way you interact with a chairman is you interact with members, right? If you interact with members, they're going to be doing a lot of your work with the chairman of the committee that's important to your effort. So what are I always like to take things down to three things, but it's really two major things that you can do, which is the smallest amount of work for the most amount of benefit. And one of them is having boots on the ground in Harrisburg, and that's the association. Some newer entities or newer professions, sometimes we create new licensure or something like that. They're just starting out in their small operations, and they really can't put together boots on the ground in Harrisburg. But it's so vital, especially with the things that we're talking about. Zach often talks about the regulatory environment that you have to face needs to be waded through. And to have somebody here, I can have the best relationship with one of you in my district, but I just don't have the time that they do to focus just on your issue, walk it to the chairman in the House, walk it to the chairman in the Senate, walk it to the governor's people. In this space, we touch on 3 different agencies in the government and in the state government. And it might even be more sometimes, but it almost always touches 2 of those 3 agencies. So coordinating that with a boots on the ground effort is vital. Now you have to inform those people, train those people. Zach's pretty good. Tim's probably really good at the tactics, and he's going to make a good impact for you. But the second thing I think about is scheduling a meeting with your state representative. And you can do it in a way with your industry. Your members, you as a member can say, my facility is in this member's district, but like in the Lehigh Valley, you could meet with 5 members in the area because all those districts are sending people into your facility, right? Or you're handling that workload in that community. So you can go, it can be a really long list. You start with number one, where your facilities are, meet with that person, and we have it down to a 15-minute meet and greet. A lot of times, to be polite, we'll sit around for an hour, 50 or 60 minutes, but you can really make your impact in 15 minutes. People say, should I go to Harrisburg? Should I go to the district? I prefer the district. I think it's important to do and meet with people there in their district offices. And you say, when you go to talk to them, so what would you say? If I was given a little quick continuing ed training on this, I would say you introduce who you are and what you do, and whatever the important issues are of the day. These are the things that matter to us, 1, 2, 3. A lot of times you don't have to be asking for something in particular. What you're trying to do there, your goal, your ask is to build a relationship. Make it so that you pick up the phone and talk to somebody. In my district, before the issues became something, well, like they are now under COVID, but also I had outreach to one of my facilities, Country Meadows, and we did a 2-hour program there where for veterans in the facility. That bond that, you know, the former Pennsylvania governor's, you know, family, you know, runs Country Meadows, and that bond is very strong because of those events that we did together. And he always said to me, I'm so amazed that you stay here at our facility for 2.5 hours. No politician does that. And I would say to him, I'm so amazed that you come from the corporate office and attend this event as well. So we both recognized very quickly we operated the same way with our authority and our position, that we wanted to be hands-on, and we got to know that about each other. So, and that relationship will be forever, right? So when Michael Leader or somebody that he directs calls me and says, hey, this is important to us, that's important to us, he also goes further to say why. And I should, you know, I could go on and on. I'll close the answer to this question down in case you have another question. But Mr. Leader does this, but Zach does this very well also. When you have a representative that explains all sides of an issue, not just your own side. Hey, listen, here's why it's important to us. And you really should be 80 or 90% right there talking about your advocacy. But also Zach will go further and say, here are the things that I've seen that will come about, so that then we're prepared for the objections to moving forward with that idea, whether it's legislation or something to do with state policy. So that just to recap, there's 2 major things. One, support your boots on the ground in Harrisburg. It's really vital, and you know when you give them an agenda of what you want accomplished, you know that they're being effective. And talk to your legislators. Say, hey, how's Zach doing? You know, and
wait, don't ask your legislator that.
Well, the reason, I mean, listen, I always tell people the same thing in politics. I say, don't ask me if you should run for office. Walk door to door and the people will tell you the truth. You know, I don't need to tell you, you don't know what you're talking about. The people will when you go out and talk to them. But it's the same thing. Listen, Zach has nothing to fear because I know the type of person that he is and his organization is. They have outstanding marks among my colleagues. So the 2 things are boots on the ground. And the one thing you can do is, if you can fit it into your schedule when it works, schedule that meeting with your local representative. Try to get in with your senator. Senator has a district 4 times as large. Get in with that senator as well. I always say, I just did it to the Secretary of Health. I say, I only need 6 minutes. You know, you could say 15 minutes. Anybody who says, I don't have time for you, or it'll be 6 weeks from now, say, fine, that's perfect. I'll see you in 6 weeks, and I'll be there for 15 minutes. I just want to say hi, introduce myself, and build that relationship. Sorry for the long answer, Zach, but
No.
good question.
No, I think that was very helpful. And some of the things you hit on, I was actually going to ask you, like, why is it important to not just come with an ask? At PHCA, we stress all the time, we want to build relationships so that we're checking in with you and your colleagues, not just coming to you and saying, we need this or we need that. So you really hit on that. I want to end with this because I want to be respectful of your time, and we'll go right into our webinar presentation. And I'm going to put you on the spot here, but I want to preface it by asking or saying this. Throughout the last year, and this includes yesterday when you asked us to testify on the vaccine rollout, you and your committee, the House Aging Committee, has really given long-term care a much needed voice. You've given a voice to the folks who have joined us for today's webinar, as well as their colleagues, as well as their residents. Because it's a year today since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic, what have you learned about long-term care? If you had to take one theme away, what has really stood out to you these last 12 months?
So right now I'm thinking about, I'm sorting through 7 or 8 things, and I'm trying to figure out the top one. The one that keeps popping to the top is that your members treat your residents much better than I think the community and the society do in general. And I met with the leader last night, and the leader of the House of Representatives has to hear all different angles. And I get to put on the aging cap. Your members handle about 10% of the people that are 60 and over. If you just take rough numbers, 3 million and 200,000 or 300,000, not just your members, but the people that were testifying yesterday, that group, it was about 300,000 people. And it's the most vulnerable of the group that I'm responsible for. So I would say what I learned is that, and I would extend that and say, everyone is expecting a large amount of dollars to be coming from the federal government. And if we don't act as a group together and do some of the things that I'm talking about, your members contact their House members and their Senate members. Your members, if they have connections into the administration, under your coordination. If we don't take advantage of that and fix some of the long-standing 10, 15, 20-year problems that have been plaguing this industry, and I'll talk about, you mentioned a few of them yesterday, but the workforce issues, I'm fearful for a minimum wage at either the state or national level, not for my area. My area is above that minimum wage. I walked two summers ago, I walked to 60 employers and was shocked that every one of them said it's not going to impact me. But I think it's going to impact this industry. And I think it's going to exacerbate a problem of the entry-level positions. So I think this group really needs to be active in the next couple months to make sure they're positioned appropriately. Zach, you do a really good job of doing this, and you need the wind in your sails from your membership to fill in, just kind of fill in, like put their hand on your shoulder and support you and move forward and take advantage of those assets that are coming. Let's not let somebody use a crisis to take care of a different political, project than the one that is at hand. And the one that's at hand, I've always felt that the network of the people on this call, meaning the residents and the employees and the families of the residents, is a network all throughout Pennsylvania. There's my Pennsylvania picture back there behind me. But it's a network through all of Pennsylvania that if we do things like raise the level for a career, workforce, career pathways, if we do things like figure out, is there anywhere to be better with, infectious disease control? Did we learn anything as a science community, not as your industry, but in science? And let's apply those. Let's apply those best practices from other states, and let's put those in. At the same time, let's make a list, and that was part of my discussion with the leader yesterday, was let's make a list of everything that's required. Zach often says that the industry is more regulated than the nuke industry, right? Dealing with nuclear waste. My brother-in-law is in that field. So as soon as Zach told me that the first time, it really sunk in what that means. So we need to lift those burdens, but I have to be careful. I don't want to just wipe away all those burdens. I want to talk to you. What are the burdens that don't make any sense? What are the places that, it just is frustrating as heck to me when I go into a doctor's office and I have to write Gary Day, my address, my email, my phone, and all that 10 points of data, who I am, on 5 different pieces of paper. Like, it just boggles my mind that we do that. And so I'm actually want to try to look in that way. How do we reduce the administrative burden, but don't eliminate any of the good parts of reporting that data? Zach, you know me pretty well. You might want to come back with another question to refocus me there. I go on and on with the answers, but that's how I would answer that second question.
No, I appreciate that, and I did put you on the spot there. Mr. Chairman, I want to say on behalf of not just PHCA, but the membership joining us today, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for being such a strong advocate on the House Aging Committee and in the House with your colleagues. And I think you gave us a really good starting point for today's webinar, and something that we can all take back and learn from and utilize moving forward. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I'm going to jump off the call. Wish you guys all well. Please keep up the great work. We have a lot to do in this committee. We have a lot to do in the House and in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to make things safer for all the people that are served by people on this call. And I really appreciate the time today and inviting me to be here. God bless all of you, and keep up God's work. That's what you're doing. So keep up the great job, and thanks again for letting me be here.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So again, I hope that was very, very helpful, and I think it was for our members. And again, as I said, something to utilize and something that we can learn from moving forward. So Tim, why don't we go to the next slide, and we'll talk about advocacy today. We're going to talk about it not just from a statewide aspect here in Harrisburg, but also the work that we're doing in Washington, D.C., because our national advocacy is becoming more and more important, especially from a state level, as we're so dependent on what the federal government is giving us. Next slide, Tim. So obviously everything that we've done over the last year and all of the advocacy that came before it has been impacted by COVID-19 and the pandemic. Now, I would go back to a year ago when we were looking at Washington State. Next slide, Tim. And what was happening at the Kirkland Life Care Center, where we were seeing for the first time COVID-19 in the United States, but not just here in the country, in a nursing home, and the devastating impact and effect that it was having in that nursing home. Now, that was late February. And even then, we knew that could translate and that could come to Pennsylvania, and we would have to combat the same devastating effects. And of course, that's exactly what happened. Next slide. Now, today, and throughout the past 12 months, we have tried to battle that adversity and those challenges. In many ways, it has been made more challenging by the folks on the screen. There's Governor Tom Wolf, former Secretary Rachel Levine, and now Acting Secretary of Health Allison Bean. We've had a lot to contend with. Obviously, everything that we do from a legislative standpoint and from an advocacy standpoint is made more difficult by some of the things, as the chairman mentioned, that are being handed to us on the regulatory side, whether it's from the Department of Health or the Department of Human Services. Go ahead, Tim. So what have we tried to do? And before we get into advocacy, I think one of the things that I have to mention that our membership has really helped us with is shaping the narrative for last year and for this year. So what have we done? We've kept in frequent contact with our membership. We started our own COVID-19 resource page. We've done media statements and press calls. We held over 300 interviews last year. We've partnered with other stakeholders, including the hospitals. We're trying to work with DOH, Governor's Office, DHS, and BHSL. We're trying to shape policy and guidelines, and we're fielding questions, as I think you heard from the chairman, every single day from members of the legislature, again, to get the things that we want done from a legislative standpoint. We've got to shape the narrative in our favor. I think we've been able to do that in Pennsylvania, and that's a credit to our membership and the good work that you do. So what does it mean to be a grassroots advocate? You know, we've said this for the last few years, but I think it bears repeating. And you heard the chairman say it, the boots on the ground, that's you. The frontline workers or the front lines of the pandemic, that's you. You raise awareness and you are going to influence public perception, policy, and regulation here in Harrisburg. It's one thing for legislators to hear the story of long-term care from Tim or from me, and they hear from us all the time. It's much more important that they hear it from you. So we've got to be proactive. We've got to share our story and your story, but I think it's important to note, and again, you heard this a few minutes ago, we very much have the spotlight right now. So if we don't share our story, if we're not talking to legislators all the time about our challenges and about how those challenges can be addressed, then we've missed an opportunity, because we will never have an opportunity like this again to truly shape the future for our providers, for our residents, and for our staff.
So good morning, everyone. As Zach has graciously introduced me, my name is Tim Ward. I am the new Director of Advocacy and Government Relations here at PHCA. I am, first off, thrilled to be on board working for such a robust association in a policy area that is now more than ever critical. And as Zach said, glad that we are finally in the spotlight. So in Pennsylvania, the politics of Pennsylvania. So in Pennsylvania, as in every state, we have a General Assembly. And this is the 7th year we're entering divided government in the Commonwealth. That is, we have a Republican-controlled House, we have a Republican-controlled Senate, and we have a Democratic governor. And of that, there are 203 state representatives, 50 state senators, 1 governor. And of course, in Congress, we have 18 members of the U.S. House representative, which is divided 9 Republicans, 9 Democrats. And we also have split government with our U.S. senators, with Senator Toomey, a Republican who's retiring at the end of his term next year, and of course, Senator Bob Casey, who is the new chairman of the Senate Aging Committee. So, as I mentioned, the Republicans control both the House and the Senate. There's 112 Republicans to 90 Democrats, 28 Republicans with 1 independent who actually was a former Democrat, but now caucuses with the Republican Party. So that's when you really looked at the Republican caucus, they really do have 29 seats, and of course, Governor Tom Wolf. So Pennsylvania is one of 11 states that have split government, and you know, the election of 2020 had a tremendous impact. Some thought that perhaps the Democrats might be able to wrestle control of at least one chamber, that being the House, away from Republican control. But in fact, what we saw was the Democratic Party, after gaining 11 seats in 2018, actually lost 3 in 2020, one of which was actually the minority leader, Frank Dermody, out in Allegheny County, who also lost his seat. And in the Senate, there was actually one Democrat, Pam Iovino from Allegheny County, lost, as did a Republican in Southeast Pennsylvania, Senator Tom Killian of Delaware and Chester County, lost. So there was a draw in the state Senate. So to enact legislation in Pennsylvania, it requires 102 members of the House of Representatives, 26 senators, and 1 governor. So, the Republicans can pass any legislation they want out of both chambers, but there still is one obstacle in the way to have legislation actually enacted, and that is whatever legislation they pass, it has to be palatable to the governor. So these are the players on our chessboard. We have Speaker Brian Cutler, who took over last year following the resignation of Speaker Mike Turzai, and Speaker Cutler is from Lancaster County. We have the newly elected House Majority Leader, Carrie Benninghoff, from Mifflin and Center County. We have the newly elected, replacing again Frank Dermody, who lost re-election, the newly elected House Minority Leader, Joanna McClinton, Democrat from Philadelphia County. We also have changes in the Senate leadership. The previous Senate President, Joe Scarnati, retired, and the former Majority Leader, Jay Corman, becomes now the Senate President. And Senator Corman is from the Center County area of the Commonwealth. We also have a newly elected Senate Majority Leader, Kim Ward, and there's no relation. Kim Ward is from Westmoreland County, and our returning Democratic leader in the Senate, Jay Costa, from Allegheny County. And one interesting note, so this is the first time in Pennsylvania that we have female floor leaders. So Leader McClinton is the first female leader on the floor in the House. She's also the first African-American woman to serve in this role. And Senator Ward is the first leader in the Senate of a female gender. So just interesting that we have slowly but surely are making progress in terms of diversity in our General Assembly. And of course, we're now in year 7 of 8 of Governor Tom Wolf, who is not eligible to run for re-election in 2022 and is retiring. And the aspects of the governor is, we have seen him as an obstacle to get some of our legislative priorities accomplished. He does have a preference, his administration does have a preference in home and community-based services. And if anybody happened to have been following either the House or Senate Appropriations Committee hearings for the Department of Human Services, you will hear Secretary Miller make those points quite clearly. They did implement managed care. And most importantly, when we talk about divided government, the House and Senate got together at the end of last session to pass COVID liability. And unfortunately, the governor vetoed the legislation. There were not enough votes to override the veto. And despite the hard work of getting that legislation across the finish line, he stands in the way, and he will continue to be an obstacle of ours to get this legislation enacted. And then finally, he believes that Medicaid increases in the state budget would only raise valuations of facilities to be sold. So, we are still staring down. We're looking for rate increases, but once again, in his budget proposal, which Zach's about to talk about, no such rate increase was included. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Zach, and he's going to talk about state issues and long-term care. So Zach?
Thanks, Tim, and thank you for that political overview. Even I learned a few things that I didn't know before, so thank you. Let's jump right into the issues to see what we're dealing with here. And as I can tell you today, and I'm sure you know this, being on the front lines, there's no shortage of issues as it relates to our industry and what we're working on now, or what we could be faced with moving forward. It starts with the state budget, but you can see on your screen workforce liability, something like the Older Adult Protective Services Act, or OPSA. We'll talk about a minimum wage, minimum staffing, and then again, venue shopping, State False Claims Act, which really it can be lumped in with liability protections. There are a lot of things as it relates to our industry going on in Harrisburg, and we're going to walk you through it now. I want to start, though, with workforce. Now, that's a picture of the Labor and Industry Committee and the House Health Committee. We held a hearing last year on workforce issues. And Tim, if you can go to the next slide, as we all know, and as we continually tell members of the legislature, Pennsylvania is the third oldest state in terms of our population in the entire country. Our fastest growing demographic is age 85 and older, and we're likely 3 years away from the silver tsunami, or when the baby boomers will age into the demographic it's most in need of long-term care. So what does that mean? That means that we need to ensure we have a robust long-term care system and that we can support our workforce. Just a few numbers that I want to throw out to you that were pretty stark and pretty staggering when we saw them first. First, long-term care is going to need to fill nearly 8 million positions in the next 5 years. The annual demand for RNs, for LPNs, for CNAs is going to be about 22,000 positions in Pennsylvania, 22,000 more positions in Pennsylvania, or positions in Pennsylvania. Those are workers that simply aren't available right now, or in many cases, they simply don't exist. We've got to get the workforce pipeline moving in Pennsylvania. As we look at a 4.1 staffing requirement, and this is one of those issues that has really gained momentum or gained steam, especially over the past year, as folks in the legislature, not just here in Harrisburg, but in Washington, D.C., have looked at some of the effects of the pandemic on long-term care and what they believe we need to be successful moving forward. They're looking at that 4.1 staffing requirement. Well, this is something that we have talked about if we're going to be faced with that requirement. Pennsylvania is going to need nearly 6,800 new workers, and it's going to cost you and our providers nearly $200 million just to meet that requirement. Talk about an unfunded mandate. So there's some challenges, obviously, with our workforce and with building our workforce, like training, like finding the right candidates. It's tough work, we all know that. And we've got to be able to pay, moving forward, competitive wages. Again, just some of the things, some of the challenges that we face as we try to invest in our workforce moving forward. Now, I have to always include this because I'm a proud father. That's my daughter, Vivian. That was her first birthday, so 12 months old. Now, we already know that's a future frontline worker right there. She's going to be working for one of our members in 18 or 19 years. We're not sure exactly what she's going to do yet, but we've talked about it. But until Vivian gets there, we need to invest in the workforce today and find those workers today. So the next issue, and the chairman noted this, is regulation and regulatory oversight. Some of the things that we're looking at and some of the things that we're going to have to push back on, especially in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, are the surveys, are some of the provisions in OPSA, the Older Adult Protective Services Act, as it relates to recurring background checks and employee screening. I know we're going to face video monitoring, as other states have. We talked about staffing earlier, to going from 2.7 to 4.1, but we're also going to be, I would think, embroiled in a minimum wage debate. Right now in Pennsylvania, the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. I think we can all agree that that's far too low. Folks at the national level, folks here in Harrisburg, are pushing to 15 an hour. Can we find a happy medium? We're not sure, but that's certainly going to have an impact on our industry. Next, I want to talk about lawsuit abuse reform. This is something that we've touched on for many years prior. First is venue shopping. This issue is very much still out there. We talked about it over the last 2 years, but I want to make sure that we bring it up again today, because you will hear about it more this year as the courts begin to open in person. Venue shopping really is the ability to shop a lawsuit to a more favorable jurisdiction. In other words, if there's a lawsuit against a nursing home here in Dauphin County, it can be moved to Philadelphia County, where there might be a more favorable jury. This was banned in 2003 with the MCARE Act. However, in 2019, the General Assembly ordered a report after the Supreme Court here at the state level said that it would consider changing this rule. Now, it looks like as of now, further action has been delayed until a report comes back and until we find out about this issue, but we know that we will have to battle it moving forward. Next, let's talk about the state budget. And this is obviously at the top of mind of everyone. First, let's talk about budget funding and what the governor did propose earlier this year. In February, he unveiled his 2021-2022 state budget proposal. We, in turn, have called it his greatest hits wish list, because there are things in this budget proposal that the governor ran on, quite frankly, in 2014 that we don't see getting enacted this year. A Marcellus Shale natural gas tax, medical marijuana or recreational marijuana being legalized, an increase in the personal income tax, among other things. This year, in the governor's budget proposal, he proposed a spending increase by about $3.1 billion, $40 billion total. He asked for a minimum wage increase, as we mentioned earlier. Obviously, he proposed flat funding for Medicaid recipients in nursing homes. His administration has said managed care is doing its job and is a success. And we have always advocated for the MDOI, or the Medicaid Day One incentive payment. That was removed from this year's budget. It's our job to get it back in. Now, this budget is unlike any other that we've probably ever experienced here in Pennsylvania, and that's because it's going to be built on federal stimulus dollars. We know now, because there was a vote yesterday in the US House and the bill is on the way to President Biden's desk, that the latest 1.9 trillion COVID relief package will include 5 to 7 billion in aid for state and local governments. Or I should say, we thought that, because the real number looks to be about 7.4 billion that is going to come to Pennsylvania. That's going to be able to fill our budget deficit, which we've estimated is about 2.5 billion, and it can also be used to aid other industries in need. Legislators have told us that they're going to take some of these funds, most likely, and send them to a rainy day fund, essentially in a program that we can use next year or the following year. They're going to try to support small businesses again, like restaurants. They're going to help other groups and industries, but they are looking at healthcare. And it is our hope, based on the conversations we've had already, that they're going to be looking at long-term care. That's a really good step in the right direction for us. So what did we do? Well, we formulated our own budget ask for this year, and I want to share it and really unveil it for you today. We looked at a few key things. First, the cost of continued testing for your staff. Next, the cost of continued PPE usage for staff. Then liability costs and what liability increases have looked like over the past year. Not only that, we're looking towards the future, reopening. We all know about the CMS guidance that was issued yesterday, which was a really good step in the right direction for visitation. That's going to involve education, training, and infection control. And we also looked at the market basket increase for nursing homes. In other words, what costs have risen over the past year and what will it cost to do business this year at the same level that you did it in 2020? We've put all of that together, and we're going to be asking this year from a federal stimulus for $396.4 million. That will be our ask to the legislature on behalf of our nursing home members. I am proud to tell you that is the largest budget ask that PHCA has ever made. And it is my belief that it is also the most justified budget ask that we have ever made. And I'm really excited to get started with that this year. I also want to talk about the MDOI because it's an important part of our advocacy. This is the Medicaid Access add-on payment. This is not in necessarily the general appropriations budget. It's always been in the fiscal code or the human services code that passes alongside a state budget. We know that we've historically asked for 16 million. The MDOI was always at about 8 million until it was doubled to 16 million in 2019. As you'll recall, most of the nursing home operators on this call will know that this goes to high Medicaid facilities. You have to have more than 65% of your residents on Medicaid, and you need to be more than 85% occupied to qualify for this vital payment. We will be fighting for this year. And then I want to also talk about the assisted living and personal care ask, because we do believe there should be an assisted living and personal care ask this year, just like last year. We took PPE costs at about 29 million. We took liability costs at 21 million, and we came to a formal ask for ALPC of 49.6 or 50 million that we're going to be asking for from federal stimulus funds. And again, our ALPC providers need this support.
All right, well, thank you, Zach, for that overview of our challenges, both at the state budget level, along with workforce and our regulatory challenges. So then the question becomes, so how do we combat these challenges? And this is where the first part of my title comes into play, Director of Advocacy. And so right here you have the advocacy cycle. And so the first step is to identify and analyze the issue. What's the issue? Are we going to be playing offense, defense? Is it an educational opportunity? And similar to setting the goal and the objectives. So after you analyze, what's the goal? Are we trying to just are we trying to advance policy? Are we trying to kill a bill? Or are we neutral, but we want to provide some educational oversight to legislators so that as they're crafting a proposal, if we stay neutral, or perhaps we can move to a positive, and hopefully we don't have to go to a negative. So then it's crucial also to identify who the decision makers are. Is it your state lawmakers? Is it federal lawmakers? Is it both? Is it a regulatory agency such as the Department of Human Services or the Department of Health? Who are we speaking to? Who do we need to advocate to advance our agenda? And so then next we have to define our ask. What are we looking for? Are we looking for funding? Are we looking for legislation? Are we looking for regulatory relief? We have to clearly define what our objective is, and then set the timeline. Is this an immediate action that we need to take? Is this something that we obviously everything with a sense of urgency in terms of public policy, but is this something that it's going to take us a year or two, possibly multiple sessions to get enacted? For your perspective, the temporary nurse aid legislation that was signed into law last session was in direct response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So are these immediate concerns, or are these concerns that aren't necessarily immediate, but perhaps things that we are always looking to be one step ahead of the environment in which we're facing? So then access to tactics and to how are we going to implement our strategies? Is it through social media campaigns? Are we connecting with our lawmakers on Twitter? Are we connecting with them on Facebook? Are we writing them letters, emails, phone calls? Are we utilizing PHCA? We have the Salsa Engage internet platform where it's essentially, the click of a button, you can be communicating with your lawmakers with pre-written or sometimes even adding your own personal touch to email correspondence just to convey our message. And then obviously we, after we implement our advocacy cycle, got to monitor and make sure that we're headed in the right direction. So obviously we're in the COVID-19 world. In a perfect world, I would be welcoming you in the next several months to Harrisburg to do our traditional rally days. But as you all know too well, that this is not a normal world, and we look forward to post-vaccine, once again, implementing some of those in-person strategies. But while we are still left in a virtual space, what can we be doing to advocate on behalf of our members and our industry? As I mentioned in the last slide, email communications, handwritten letters, telephone calls, social media connections, and of course your good old virtual meetings. I'm sure we are all thrilled that perhaps in a few months down the line, GoToMeeting, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, they might not necessarily be in our future. So with virtual advocacy, it's important when we're writing emails and we're writing letters, we have to make sure first off we're contacting the correct individuals. If it's legislation in the House, we want to make sure we're contacting our state representatives. It's not a bad idea to contact your state senators, but if it's we don't want to be communicating with lawmakers on legislation that might not necessarily be under their purview yet. We want to always make sure that we when we're advocating for our issues, we know who our targets are. It's also important with emails. Specifically, lawmakers are getting emails from constituents, hundreds a day or a week. Zach and I have both had the pleasure of serving in legislative offices, and we can tell you that when legislation starts to move in Harrisburg, our inboxes become flooded with constituent emails that are advocating for or against specific legislation. A lot of those form emails, I will tell you, they're important, of course, because it helps build numbers. And I served in the House. We have a platform called RepNet, and what would happen was you would get the email correspondence from the constituents. From if the PHCA was running a SALSA Engage advocacy campaign, I would take all of those emails that we received. I would individually add them into our system based off of our constituents, and then they each get a response letter from the representative. Those responses are most likely going to be form type letters, just a broader review of the issue. But here's why they're important. These form emails are important because, when a lawmaker goes to, if it's a close call on whether they're going to support or oppose legislation, or perhaps they don't have any perspective at all on a topic, oftentimes the lawmaker will call their office and say, hey, can you HB 123? I'm getting calls about, my leaders want me to support this legislation, but I really don't know anything about it. Can you tell me, have we been contacted on this issue by constituents? It's happened to me often. The representative I served, I could tell him, yes, I had 50 people in your district reach out about House Bill 123. So obviously it's an important, issue to a lot of your constituents, whereas 0 people on the other side have reached out. So it helps make decisions from lawmakers a little clearer. So that's why they're important. We'll talk a little bit more about emails and letters and how, to the extent that you can make them personal, a letter or an email, adding personal perspective, a local perspective, how, rather than, just an overview of the issue, but how day to day this is impacting you right now. Those are the types of emails and letters that you're more likely to get a direct response from the representative, rather than just a policy crafted, tailored communication that might just be sterile. So next, on social media. And before we start this webinar, Zach and I talked a lot about how social media is the new public platform where a lot of the discourse in our democracy is now taking place, for better or for worse. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, our lawmakers are on it. Every member of the General Assembly, House and Senate, they all have at minimum Facebook pages. And their official Facebook pages. Often they have their own personal fan pages. They could be campaign pages as well. Most lawmakers have Twitter accounts where they're, as they're interacting with policy, they'll be tweeting stuff out as well. So they're on those 2 platforms as well as Instagram. But here's why that's important, because lawmakers, if they don't control their own Facebook account, I guarantee you they probably control their own Twitter account, and everyone gets those notifications on their cell phone. Somebody's tweeted at you, and it's easy. rather than the clutter of an email inbox, it's very easy to get those notifications. Okay, well, who's contacting me and what about? That gives you a little bit of a readout on the screen. And the more of those types of communications come in, it helps build awareness of issues. Lawmakers are, very interested of what, when they're posting content, what their constituents, what kind of feedback, positive or negative, on the policy issue that they're posting about. They do read those comments. I've had firsthand experience of lawmakers at 11 o'clock at night saying, so-and-so said this to me about my vote on X, Y, or Z, how should I respond? Or, hey, are we getting a lot of feedback on this issue? I didn't realize it was such a hot button issue. So those comments actually do matter. Virtual meetings, again, we'd like them to be in person, but virtual will do just fine. In fact, over the past week, we just recently begun, there's over 30 lawmakers that are freshmen in both the House and Senate that are in districts that we have facilities in. So we've begun educating these freshman lawmakers on PHCA, long-term care, and then also making that local connection. It's critical for you, especially in times of crisis, but even in normal times, to be able to pick up the phone and call or text or email directly the representative and say, hey, this is a challenge I'm facing. How can you help me? And oftentimes they will have a solution, or if not, that begins the conversation of, do we need policy enacted to solve the problem? So virtual meetings are just as good as in-person meetings, and that direct 15-minute meeting start to build a relationship that, ultimately speaking, you'll find that as issues are coming up, as legislation's coming down the pike in our sector, yes, they'll be communicating with PHCA to see what our stance on the bill is, and I'm sure they'll know just based off our advocacy. But they oftentimes like to call their own facility operators and say, hey, 2.7 versus 4.1, how's this going to impact you, and how is it going to impact your facility in my district? That's oftentimes more powerful than just hearing from the state association. And then finally, phone calls, the good old days of phone calls, that still works just fine. Just know that you're probably not going to speak directly to the representative or the senator unless you schedule an appointment, but that's why they have staff. The staff there is, taking your information down. They're also, can provide feedback. Always a good idea to call directly and convey your points, and ask what the representative or the senator's position is on the issue. And of course, I always remind people, because I'm a legislative staffer, please be nice, and I'm sure you all are. These individuals are there to help, and so a courteous but short, concise message is key when we're doing phone calls to the representatives and the senators. So post COVID-19, as I mentioned at the top of my spiel here, this is what I love to see from an advocacy perspective. A picture goes a very long way in terms of advocacy. How does it help us? Well, you get to brag to your colleagues that, hey, I had representative Zach, I don't know, is that Doyle Heffley? Am I seeing there? I'm not sure if who that quite is, but from your perspective, companies, local facilities at the facility, the direct location, it's always great for PR and marketing to show that you're bringing in legislators to the fold to discuss issues that are impacting you directly. From a legislator perspective, they always like to show themselves working. And these are the types of things that'll get a lot of views, a lot of clicks, a lot of likes on Facebook. Hey, I was just out at Country Meadows and heard all the great work they're doing to combat COVID-19. That's the type of stuff that really drives their social media content and really makes them feel good. Welcoming legislators back into our facilities. Once we're in a post-vaccine world and we're able to do this is a great way. It serves a huge educational purpose. And remember, just as we are advocates, we are educators as well. It's great to be able to bring in lawmakers, to have them travel through your facility, meet residents, meet staff, talk to them one-on-one about the impacts of long-term care and legislation that they're considering in Harrisburg and how that might have an impact back down in the district level. I always say, you know, introduce yourselves, introduce your staff, introduce the residents. There's a good chance that the residents, there might be a connection there between resident and lawmaker. And a perfect example of this is on Tuesday. We had a freshman meeting with Senator Kane down in Delaware County. And at the end of the call, the facility operator we had, he asked the facility operator that we had on the call as well, hey, do you know Louis? And, you know, the facility operator said, of course I know Louis. Louis calls me 2 times a day. You know, I'm very astute of who Louis is. He's an old friend from the neighborhood. And that connection there, from my perspective, I love to see it, because not only does that help bring it home for Senator Kane, but when push comes to shove, you know, it's always good to know, you know, it's good for me to know in the back of my pocket, hey, you know, if I need to get to Senator X or Y, you know, there's a personal contact there that you know, we can wage to help advance our agenda, or to at least provide education. So those local connections are great. And then of course, you know, it doesn't have to specifically be a tour. You don't have to specifically bring them in for legislative purposes. Birthday celebrations, holidays, Memorial Day, Veterans Day. If you're having a town hall, those are the types of events, again, lawmakers love to attend, just to be out in the community, and it helps show that they're working. And as I mentioned, PHCA Rally Days, I am looking forward to having you all back in Harrisburg once we're able to, hitting the pavement up in Harrisburg, showing strength in numbers to advocate for our industry. If you haven't participated in the past, you know, moving forward, once we can do so safely, I encourage you all to come to Harrisburg, because showing lawmakers how large our association is, the you know, the geographic reach of our association truly shows how strong PHCA is as an advocacy force. So things to remember, of course, and I think I actually jumped the gun a little bit on this stuff, but you know, bring them in, tour, highlight any awards or best practices. They like to show off that they've got industry leaders in their district. So don't be shy, brag to them, either invite them to an award ceremony, or if you're receiving an award, you know, maybe have somebody plug it to the office and have them put it up on social media. That's all good stuff. You know, introducing them to your residents. Town halls are great. You know, if you're having residents town halls, maybe shake it up a little bit. You can bring them in to provide a Harrisburg update. Seniors are, you know, they're voters. They you know, they're our most likely voting demographic. They like to know what's going on. So not on the political end, but just on the legislative end, they like to know what policy is being kicked around in Harrisburg that might impact long-term care or other issues. So you know, those are really good issues, or good ways to bring lawmakers in as well. And then, as I mentioned, you know, as there are events that are being scheduled, you know, make sure that you add them to the invite list, because I guarantee you, more often than not, they'll show up at that facility, you know, to interact with with you and to the residents. And finally, just again, just to advocacy communications, to really hit it home, you know, let's make sure we have a message. You know, it doesn't have to be an organized email or letter writing campaign. It can just be, hey, I saw this issue pop up in McKnight's or in your local paper, and here's how this issue directly impacts me. Using Twitter to interact with lawmakers is also great. It also helps because there's a character limit, so you have to keep it concise as possible. Facilitating your message through Facebook, again, both with social media, I would encourage everyone to be, you know, concise, but also respectful and not confrontational. Phone calls are a great way to speak directly with staff and establish those connections. You know, petitions or any types of you know, comments on regulation, as those come out, that they're all great ways to get involved with advocacy. And then, of course, you know, letters to the editor, those tactics still work as well. So there's a lot of, you know, while we're stuck behind computer screens, before we can safely re-engage our lawmakers in person, there's a lot we can be doing behind the keyboard or behind the computer screen to ensure that our message is getting out there, that our lawmakers are prioritizing our issues, and establishing that local connection, so that in times of crisis, or just, just to check in, that you can, your lawmaker is checking in on you, calling you, texting you, saying, how are you doing? What can I do to help? And then our response, follows whatever assistance you might need. So with that, Zach, I don't know if you want to swoop back in here. We encourage you, of course, to connect with PHCA. So if you want to close us out here, that'd be great.
Yeah, again, to Tim's point, please connect with us on social media. You see our Twitter, our Facebook, and our LinkedIn handles there. You can also connect with me personally, and we have my email address on the next slide, Tim. We have my email address, my phone number, my Twitter and Facebook account. For some reason, we don't have Tim's social media accounts on there, only mine. I'm not sure what's on there that he doesn't want us to see, but we'll dig into that after this webinar. But you have Tim's phone number and his email address as well. So we want to know, Wendy, if there are questions, and I would just end by saying this. Really, for the last year, we have been embroiled in this pandemic, and we know it's certainly not over, but we haven't been able to advocate in person. We've all been so busy that it's been tough to even think about sending messages or speaking with our legislator. It's our hope that we're getting to the point now where we can advocate again as a group, and we're excited to welcome you to Harrisburg or come visit you at your facilities and at your communities, and then we can get this started again. So with that, Wendy, I'll turn it over to you. I want to thank everybody, and we'll take questions if there are any.
Great. Thanks, Zach and Tim. That was great information that you shared with us today, and we are open for question and answer. So if anyone does have questions, please type them in the question pane on the right hand of your screen, and we'll get to those as soon as they come in. Just want to take a moment while we're waiting for those questions to let you know that we do have our quality symposium set for to start next Thursday, March 18th. And if you haven't already seen the agenda for that, I encourage you to go to the PHCA website. We also have more webinars scheduled through the beginning of June. The April webinars are up and advertised, so look for those. And we'll be adding some more for May. We'll have some legal issues that we'll be covering in May with some Burns and White attorneys. So look for those, more information to come on those soon. All right, I think you guys did such a great job covering everything, and they know how to get in touch with you. So we'll close things out right now. Again, don't forget to complete the survey as we close out the webinar today. Today's webinar has been recorded and is made available on the PHCA website. So if you know anyone who could benefit from hearing the webinar and all of the great tips, please direct them to the website. Thanks again to Zach and Tim and for presenting today, and I just want to wish everybody a great remainder to your day and your week. Stay well.